So you see, that's where the trouble began. That smile. That damn smile.
Choo Choo Charles is the perfect example of why I love indie games so much. It's more or less just a vertical slice that's been fully realized without any fluff, stretched out into a single player experience that you could easily finish in a single sitting. Not to mention, it's also launched the YouTube career of the guy who made it, Gavin over at 2-Star Games. I mean, damn son, he's probably making as much money from Google AdSense as he's gonna make from actually selling the game. Anyway, in Choo Choo Charles, you're playing as some dude heading to an island to help out a mate. An island where a demonic spider train has taken over, running amok and terrorizing the locals.
It'll be the biggest attraction your city's ever seen.
And it's up to you to find out the reasons for why this thing exists in the first place, along with then killing it with extreme prejudice.
Yes, sir. Welcome to Aranerum.
You're accompanied by your friend who looks a lot like Burt Reynolds' character from Boogie Nights, and this guy's pretty quickly killed by Charles in the prologue after an ambush and left for dead, leaving you to finish off the job. Thing is, Charles is basically unkillable, so you gotta first figure out how to even do that in the first place. This involves driving your train around the island, completing main and side missions for various NPCs all scattered across the map, along with collecting scrap along the way to upgrade your train's speed, armor, and damage, plus finding new weapons for the train, including a rocket launcher, a flamethrower, and an artillery gun.
I made this rocket launcher.
Rocket launcher!
Of course, along with having to deal with all the random encounters with Charles himself, when this nightmare-fueled abomination comes hurtling towards you out of nowhere and then chases you relentlessly. That right there, that's basically the game in a nutshell. It's a simple gameplay loop and it forms the basis for the 2 or 3 hour long experience.
Now take these scraps and skedaddle.
In any other game, I think doing something this simple would be a bad thing, but the foundations of what you're doing and the mystery surrounding this entire premise is interesting enough that it just doesn't really matter that it's so short. Plus, it also feels like it's wrapping things up just around the right time when it's, starting to wear out its welcome.
Are you ready to take this thing for a spin?
Now, I still remember seeing clips for this game on Twitter, before I got banned from Twitter, that is, and right away I got instantly captivated with the setting, which is just effortlessly unnerving. It's often raining too, along with being eerie and foggy, and the whole environment just has this really unsettling vibe, heightened by those moments you can hear Charles off in the distance with those musical cues that announce his impending arrival. I feel like so many indie horror games have you just running away from some kind of super powerful monster that can often easily kill you, but here you've often got the opportunity to escape from Charles and even repel him if you do enough damage. There's also something kind of brilliant about combining something as wholesome as trains, which, let's be honest, is a fad that every young boy was into at one point, along with Kimberly from Power Rangers, and then combining all of that with something equally as repulsive as spiders. And that's coming from me, an Australian. I mean, our country basically invented spiders. Charles even has the whole spindly leg thing going on too, which is the objectively most horrifying kind of legs a spider can have, along with this terrifying looking Richter screen. So if the premise of a train with a face in Thomas the Tank Engine wasn't horrifying enough to begin with, well, now you've got to also deal with this awful looking thing. Anyway, the mystery behind what Charles is actually really interesting, and eventually you set out to find 3 magical eggs which are supposed to make him vulnerable so you can finally kill him. These eggs, however, are protected by a weirdo group of loyalists, so it seems, who are protecting the eggs for their own reasons. And it's actually kind of surprising as to what those reasons are when you eventually find out.
Shouldn't be here!
Now, to keep in mind too, this is a game mostly developed by a single person, and that becomes pretty apparent early on here when you notice how simple some of the character models are, and the fact too that there's not any kind of lip syncing when people talk.
Fixing the lighthouse will definitely increase our chances of being spotted.
Animations are basic, if just non-existent, and the missions aren't too in-depth either, mostly just involving going somewhere, finding something, then bringing it back. Couple of standouts include this one, crossing over a small lake, dealing with a creature under the water, and if this ain't a nod to the water monster in Amnesia: The Dark Descent, well, then I don't know what is. Or yeah, given to you two by a lady that's more or less like a textbook witch standing around a bubbling cauldron.
I smell a carcass on the island in the swamp, and if you wait over there and bring it back for me, I'll pay you some scraps.
Another one has you collecting 8 pages placed around a small forest, which also might be a reference to Slender. Remember that old Twitch bait game that kicked off the whole indie horror trend in the first place? Or another one with an NPC who's just a little bit too obsessed with pickles. Yeah, pickles?
Come again.
And if that's not a euphemism, well then I'm just going to assume the events on the island have made her go batshit insane.
I would have gotten them hours ago, but I lost my pickle caves!
Never mind.
Missions usually reward you with spare scrap, which goes right into upgrading that train or repairing it from damage sustained. And it doesn't take too long here until you've got this train fully upgraded, and at that point you almost want Charles to attack you. That still doesn't make the sight of him any less unnerving though, and worst of all is when he attacks you when you're nowhere near the train to begin with. Whenever Charles is coming after you and you gotta hide inside buildings, it's common to see him glitching out a bit and even clipping through the walls, but funnily enough, that actually made it somehow more frightening to me. And you know what? That might be a problem, only it's not. Simply because of just how strong and compelling the rest of the experience is. I mean, look son, Choo Choo Charles isn't going to win any awards, but it also doesn't seem to try to. It's just that simple concept of riding your train around to the next point of interest, finishing missions, collecting scrap, upgrading your rig, and then shooting that nasty spider monster when it rears its nightmare fuel head. Driving the train is simple enough too. You either move forward, backward, or you stop. And you might have to occasionally choose which direction the rail takes, but that's about it. It's not rocket science, and you don't have to worry about keeping this thing stocked up with coal or something similar. It's basically forward, backward, or stop. Checking on the train periodically to make sure it doesn't get turned into scrap itself. And if it was any other vehicle, I'm not sure this would have worked. Because like I said, I do think every kid goes through a train phase at least once in their younger years. So it's like on some kind of subconscious, universal level, there's just something so fun here about being able to drive your own train around on this large island and go pretty much wherever you want to. I think it's why I like those more opened up levels in other FPS games like On a Rail in Half-Life or Highway 17 in Half-Life 2. Because although the experience is ultimately linear, being able to choose how and when you finally get to that bottleneck is an experience that's going to be unique to each person who plays it.
Thank you so much for bringing my journal.
There's a word that people use online a lot, and that word is comfy. And the best way to describe it is, it's the way you feel when you play a game that doesn't really force the player's hand. Spyro the Dragon on the PlayStation is a perfect example of a comfy game. It's brimming with soul and charm, and you've got countless worlds to explore, but you get to do that at your own pace, without the impending threat of like a looming countdown or something else that rushes your playstyle. Kinda how I feel again here with Choo Choo Charles. And despite the fact you spend the entire game being pursued by this hellspawn, there's still something oddly relaxing about being able to cruise around on this island in your very own train. You'll frequently come across abandoned buildings and ruined structures along the way, and hopping out and exploring all of these is often going to reward you with extra scrap, along with finding journal entries that help build on the lore, and even cosmetic upgrades in the form of paint colours. Or, I don't know, even just weird spooky shit that doesn't even need to have a meaning, outside of just existing for the sole purpose of messing with the player's head. I've lost count the amount of Unreal Engine games that have had me exploring generic looking forests, but the simple premise of a demonic train just being out of sight the entire time makes this generic looking forest just that much more captivating. And the abundance of little things to find along the way just adds a purpose to all of that exploration. Throughout the island, you'll also find stockpiles of scrap hidden inside locked chests, and there's even a bit of a mini-game here to break into these things, making it more than just pressing E on every little pile of scrap you come across. And even once you finish the main story, you can still go back out there and continue to explore, trying to collect all of the stuff you missed, which is a nice addition.
Pure genius! Woohoo!
Oh, but the best thing, being able to see the train change visibly as you're upgrading it, with it becoming more and more resilient in appearance. I don't know, man, even just something as simple as being able to change the colour, like, it just adds this feeling of ownership. And about all I'm upset with here is that they didn't include the option to blast a whistle when driving it. Going out on foot is that whole risk versus reward predicament, because whenever you're away from your train, you're basically defenseless. And if the game decides Charles is going to attack you during these moments, well, you're kind of fucked.
He's juggling here.
Kind of like when you're a little kid and you wake up in the middle of the night and you need to take a piss. You know, when you wonder if you should just hold on to it or brave that pitch black hallway to get to the bathroom, and try to run past all the monsters you're convinced are just waiting in the shadows to grab you. That desperate sprint back to your train after you've looted some stuff to try to hightail it out of there is the kind of stuff that makes your asshole pucker up so tight you can use it to crush rocks. Now, the main problem I think Choo Choo Charles has here is the stealth mechanic, which is just kind of undercooked. Let me explain. Right, so the only enemies aside from Charles you're dealing with are these weirdos wearing masks, guys armed with shotguns who patrol these key areas of the island, and you don't have any basic weapons of your own here, so the main way to get past them is to simply avoid them and stay hidden. The only issue is that the stealth system is really basic and often trial and error.
Intruder! Over here!
All of these guys whistle to themselves constantly, which is meant to be a way for the player to determine where they are without needing to actually see them. This harkens back to games like Thief the Dark Project, where the patrolling guards would often cough or clear their throat or even chat to other NPCs. And I feel like it's the same kind of idea here too, where it can give necessary information to the player without then also needing to take you out of the world by adding in stupid shit like giving the enemies a glowing outline. The problem is though that the player is so limited in how they can maneuver around them, because you've really only got the option to lean left and right, ideally around something you're using for cover. I mean, there's not even the option to crouch to reduce your visibility, and it makes these sections needlessly difficult because you're spotted so easily. And when you're spotted, there really doesn't seem to be anything else you can do here, apart from just running your ass off and hoping that these guys give up chase. But instead, most of the time you'll probably be shot to death. Even then though, there's not really any kind of penalty here when you're killed, outside of just losing a couple of pieces of scrap in your time. But you've always got an abundance of scrap anyway, and my time is worthless, so it's never really that much of a dilemma. It did get to the point though where I just kind of said fuck it, and I lure a bunch of these enemies back to my train on purpose so I could use the machine gun to finish them off. Now, whether or not this is intentional, I have no idea, but let me tell you man, it was far easier this way and less frustrating than trying to sneak past them. Now, I'm not expecting like Splinter Cell Chaos Theory levels of stealth mechanics, you know what I mean, like light meters or thermal goggles, but even like the basic inclusion of a crouch button, along with enemies detecting you over time instead of instantly, just would have been a godsend. I don't know, it's kind of like a minor annoyance in what's otherwise a pretty solid game, and I can definitely see this thing pissing off a bunch of people. I don't know the first thing about coding AI or stealth mechanics for a video game, but there has to be a better way to do it than this. It does become an issue though, because these really are the only enemies you deal with outside of Charles, and you gotta get past these guys a hell of a lot. There's not really any other threats to worry about on the island aside from that lake monster and that side mission with that ghost that teleports you away from the area if it touches you. And even then, like as far as I can tell, that thing can't even kill you. Its only power seems to be slightly inconveniencing the player. I do feel like there's been a bit of wasted potential here too though, in regard to including more supernatural elements to the island and really exploring how spooky this place could have been. There's just so many times I was off exploring these creepy abandoned areas and kept expecting something to happen, but it just never did. Yeah, it's kind of disappointing that it couldn't be capitalized on more. I also just kind of wish there were more instances when I got to see Charles. Throughout the island you'll often come across telescopes, and I half expected to be able to interact with one of these and see him off in the distance or something. Those random moments he finally shows up never fails to make me feel my trousers, but they're so accentuated by those audio cues it's like you're given a pretty clear-cut warning before you've even seen him. You ever play that game The Nun by Puppet Combo? It was this really scary game set in an abandoned orphanage where a demonic nun was constantly chasing the player, and her actions were totally dynamic, so you were always on edge, waiting for this psychopathic bitch to pop up and take chase. And I guess I kind of hope the appearances of Charles would have been like that more to an extent. I don't know, maybe it's something I'm overanalyzing, or maybe it's just something they can add further down the track. Pun intended.
Pure genius! Woohoo!
The other thing I think is that the game is just way too easy, even with all the random deaths you get from failing those stealth sections. You only ever lose a small amount of scrap when you're killed, and repairing the train isn't too costly either. It can be tense early on here when you don't have all that much scrap, but by about the halfway mark it's just a non-issue. That is alright on some level though, because I get the vibe this isn't supposed to be some super hardcore survival game. It's kind of like it's something you're almost expected to beat in a single sitting, and again, it's a game made by basically one person. So I think for the price point and the time spent here, Choo Choo Charles really is hard to fault. It's easy to look at this thing as just streamer bait, and I'm sure plenty of folks will get a good face muscle workout here, exaggerating their reactions to get that perfect clickbait thumbnail. But there is a game here, a fully realised concept with a gameplay loop that's more than just a 45-minute long build-up that ends in a jump scare. For the 3 or so hours it took me to get through the whole thing, I was on the edge of my seat for the entire time, having an absolute hoot.
Good on you!
So yeah, if you're looking for a fun, short little time sink that'll definitely get the heart racing, well, shit son, this is definitely going to do it. Bit of a minor spoiler here too, there's what could be a potential hint at a sequel with a note you find in-game, referring to another creature called Gus the Bus. And yeah, I'd be totally down for running away in terror from a demonic school bus. That's up there in my top 5 nightmares, along with running away from a demonic toilet. Don't ask. Either way though, after having played this, I'll never look at Thomas the Tank Engine the same way ever again.